My name is Jean. I am 57 years old. I sat in my living room, signing papers, allowing my son to change his last name. My wife, Sandra, stood nearby, beaming. Her lover, Victor, watched from behind, satisfied. Everyone expected me to break down. But I was calm. Too calm. None of them knew about the 90-year-old clause. Have you ever waited years to reveal a truth that changes everything? Before I continue, tell me where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button. I need to take you back to where it all began. Back to 1991, when I was just 24 years old and working as an accountant for a small firm in Boston. I came from a simple family. My father was a carpenter who spent his days building furniture with his hands. My mother worked as a nurse at the local hospital. We never had much money, but we had love. We had integrity. Those were the values I carried with me into adulthood. I met Sandra at a company party that spring. She was 18 years old, fresh out of finishing school, with the kind of beauty that made men stop and stare. Her blonde hair fell in waves past her shoulders. Her green eyes sparkled under the chandeliers. She laughed at something someone said, and that laugh drew me across the room like a magnet. We talked for hours that night. Sandra seemed different from the wealthy girls I had encountered before. She listened when I spoke. She asked questions about my work, my family, my dreams. By the end of the evening, I was convinced I had found someone special. What I did not know then was that Sandra was the only daughter of Harold Whitmore. The Harold Whitmore. His name was practically royalty in Boston real estate circles. The Whitmore family had been building their empire for 90 years, starting with Sandra's great-great-grandfather back in 1935. They owned commercial buildings, residential complexes, and prime downtown land worth more than I could comprehend. When Harold found out his daughter was dating an accountant from a middle-class family, he made his feelings perfectly clear. I remember the first time I met him. Sandra brought me to the Whitmore mansion for Sunday dinner. The house was enormous, with marble floors and crystal chandeliers and paintings that probably cost more than my annual salary. Harold sat at the head of a dining table that could seat 20 people. He looked me up and down like I was something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "You are not worthy of my daughter," he said. His voice was cold, matter of fact, like he was stating an obvious truth rather than delivering an insult. Sandra squeezed my hand under the table. "Daddy, please." Harold ignored her. "What do you make in a year?" "Boy, 40,050. My daughter spends that on clothes." I kept my composure. "With respect, Mr. Whitmore, I am not interested in your money. I am interested in your daughter." Harold laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "We will see how long that lasts." Despite Harold's disapproval, Sandra insisted on continuing our relationship. She told me she loved me for who I was, not what I had. She said she was tired of the superficial men her father kept introducing her to. She wanted something real, something genuine. I believed her. We got married in 1992, after a year of dating. Harold demanded that I sign a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. The document was 30 pages long, filled with legal language designed to ensure I would get nothing if the marriage ended. I signed it without hesitation. Harold smirked when I handed back the papers. "At least you know your place." The wedding itself was a grand affair. Harold spared no expense, not for my benefit, but to maintain appearances in front of his business associates. 300 guests filled a ballroom at the finest hotel in Boston. I stood at the altar in a rented tuxedo while Sandra walked toward me in a dress that cost more than my car. During our vows, Sandra looked into my eyes and promised to love me forever. I promised the same. At that moment, I meant every word. I had no way of knowing that forever would have an expiration date. Our son Tyler was born in 1993. I was 26 years old, and holding my newborn son for the first time was the greatest moment of my life. His tiny fingers wrapped around my thumb. His eyes, still unfocused, seemed to search for my face. I made a silent promise to be the best father I could be. For a while, things were good. Sandra and I settled into a rhythm of parenthood. I worked long hours at the accounting firm, while Sandra stayed home with Tyler. On weekends, I would take my son to the park. We would throw a baseball back and forth until his little arm got tired. I read him bedtime stories every night, doing different voices for each character, until he giggled himself to sleep. Sandra was attentive in those early years. She baked cookies with Tyler on rainy afternoons. She organized birthday parties and play dates. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. But Harold was always there, hovering at the edges of our life, like a shadow that would not fade. He showed up unannounced on weekends, bearing expensive gifts for Tyler that made my modest presence look pathetic by comparison. A bicycle from Grandpa, a gaming system from Grandpa, designer clothes that a 5-year-old had no business wearing. More than the gifts, it was the influence that worried me. Tyler should go to preparatory school, Harold announced one evening at dinner. I have already spoken with the headmaster at Whitmore Academy. They are expecting his application. I set down my fork. Sandra and I have discussed this. We want Tyler to go to public school with other kids from the neighborhood. Harold looked at me like I had suggested enrolling Tyler in prison. Public school. With common children, absolutely not. I opened my mouth to argue, but Sandra cut me off. Daddy might have a point, Jean. The education at Whitmore Academy is exceptional. I stared at my wife. We had talked about this for weeks. We had agreed. And now, with one comment from her father, she was changing her mind. Tyler went to Whitmore Academy. That was the first time I realized how little my opinion mattered in my own family. It would not be the last. As the years passed, I noticed Sandra slowly changing. The woman who had claimed to want something real began to crave something else entirely. She started spending more time at the country club, more time shopping in boutiques that required appointments, more time with friends who measured their worth in designer labels and vacation homes. She stopped asking about my day at work, stopped laughing at my jokes. When I reached for her hand, she would find an excuse to pull away. I tried to reconnect. I planned romantic dinners, suggested weekend getaways. Each time, Sandra had somewhere else to be. A charity luncheon, a spa appointment, a shopping trip that could not wait. And always, Harold was whispering in her ear. "You deserve better," he would tell her. I have heard him say it when he thought I was not listening. "You settled for less than you are worth." It was around 2005 that I discovered something that would change everything. Harold had come over for one of his frequent visits. Tyler was 12 years old by then, and Harold was taking him to a baseball game. While they were getting ready, Harold left his briefcase in our living room. He had been reviewing some documents and forgot to take them with him. I should have ignored the papers, should have set them aside and waited for Harold to retrieve them. But something made me look. The folder was labeled Whitmore Family Trust. Inside, I found documents detailing a fortune I had never imagined. The trust had been established in 1935 by Harold's grandfather, a man named Edmund Whitmore. Over 90 years, the trust had grown to include real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and cash reserves totaling tens of millions of dollars. But what caught my attention was a clause buried deep in the legal language. A clause written by Edmund Whitmore himself in his own hand and preserved in the trust documents. The clause stated that only individuals bearing the Whitmore surname could inherit from the trust. It was explicit and absolute. If a family member changed their name, they would forfeit all rights to the inheritance. No exceptions. No appeals. Furthermore, spouses who took the Whitmore name through marriage were only eligible to benefit from the trust if they had children or grandchildren who maintained the Whitmore surname. It was Edmund's way of ensuring that the family name and the family fortune remained linked forever. I read the clause 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. Then I carefully placed the documents back in Harold's briefcase, exactly as I had found them. When Harold returned for his papers, I handed them over with a polite smile. "Forget something I asked. Just some boring business documents," Harold said dismissively. "Nothing you would understand." I nodded and let him leave. That night I lay awake thinking about what I had discovered. I had no intention of using the information. I loved Sandra. I loved Tyler. I hoped that somehow our family would find its way back to happiness. But I filed the knowledge away in my mind, just in case. Something told me that one day it might matter. The years after 2005 brought more distance between Sandra and me. We lived in the same house, but existed in different worlds. Sandra became obsessed with social status. Every dinner party had to be perfect. Every vacation had to be photographed for her friends to envy. She criticized my car for being too old, my suits for being off the rack, my ambitions for being too small. Meanwhile, Tyler grew more distant with each passing year. Harold and Sandra had succeeded in shaping him into their image. By the time Tyler was 17, he looked at me with barely concealed contempt. "Why do you drive that thing?" Tyler asked one afternoon, gesturing at my sedan. "Grandfather says only losers drive Japanese cars." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "There is nothing wrong with this car. It is reliable and paid off." Tyler rolled his eyes. "Whatever." It broke my heart, but I kept trying. I invited Tyler to go fishing on weekends like we used to when he was small. He always had an excuse: a party with friends, a golf game with grandfather, video games he could not pause. I left messages on his phone that he never returned, sent birthday gifts that disappeared into his room without acknowledgement. Every rejection was a small cut, but I refused to stop trying. He was my son. That had to mean something. 2015 brought the final blow to my marriage. Sandra introduced Victor Harrington at one of Harold's annual garden parties. He was 48 years old, tall and silver-haired, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. He was the CEO of a successful investment firm, and more importantly to Harold, a member of their exclusive social circle. I knew the moment I saw them together. It was in the way Sandra touched Victor's arm when she laughed, the way she leaned into him when they talked, the way her eyes followed him across the garden with a hunger I had not seen in years. "This is Victor Harrington," Harold announced, clapping Victor on the shoulder. "One of the finest businessmen in Boston, a real man of substance. The emphasis on real was not lost on me." Victor shook my hand with a grip that was unnecessarily firm. "So you are Sandra's husband. She has told me so much about you." "I bet she has," I said. Over the following months, Victor became a regular presence at Whitmore family gatherings. Sandra always found reasons to be near him: late meetings to discuss charity events, coffee dates to plan fundraisers, dinners that lasted until midnight. I said nothing. I watched. I waited. In 2018, I found the proof I had been expecting. Sandra left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. It buzzed with an incoming message, and I glanced at the screen out of habit. What I saw made my stomach turn. The message was from Victor. The words were explicitly romantic, referencing encounters and feelings that left no room for innocent interpretation. I scrolled through the conversation. There were hundreds of messages spanning months. Plans for secret meetings, declarations of love, discussions of a future together. I put the phone back exactly where Sandra had left it. When she came out of the shower wrapped in a towel and humming a song, I acted like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. That same week I contacted a lawyer named Mr. Bernard. He was 62 years old, a former prosecutor who now specialized in estate law. I had found him through a colleague at work, someone who swore that Mr. Bernard was the best at navigating complex family legal situations. In his office, surrounded by law books and framed degrees, I told Mr. Bernard everything: the marriage, the affair, the Whitmore family trust, the clause about the surname. Mr. Bernard listened without interruption. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "You say this clause requires the Whitmore surname to be maintained for inheritance rights?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I saw the original documents. Edmund Whitmore wrote the clause himself." Mr. Bernard nodded slowly. These old family trust provisions are often ironclad. The courts respect the original benefactor's intentions, especially when the language is unambiguous. So if someone were to change their name, they would forfeit their inheritance rights permanently. Mr. Bernard paused. "But you would need the family to make that choice voluntarily. You cannot force them to give up the name." "I understand," I said. "I have no intention of forcing anyone to do anything." Mr. Bernard studied me for a long moment. "What exactly are you planning, Mr. Jean?" "I am planning to be patient," I said. "Very patient." Tyler was 25 years old by then. He worked at Victor's investment firm, a job arranged by Harold to ensure Tyler stayed close to the right people. Tyler had grown into an arrogant young man who measured success in dollars and status. He visited me once or twice a year, always briefly, always with an air of doing me a favor. Dad Tyler said during one of those visits, "You need to face reality. You are never going to be successful like grandfather or Victor." "Why do you keep pretending I am not pretending anything?" I said quietly. "I work hard. I pay my bills. I am honest." Tyler laughed. "Honest? That and $5 will buy you a cup of coffee." The words stung, but I did not lash out. I knew that Tyler was repeating what he had been taught to believe. Harold and Sandra had spent decades convincing him that I was a failure, that my values were weaknesses, that love and integrity were foolish ideals for foolish people. I kept reaching out anyway. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Father's Day, I called or sent a gift. Tyler rarely acknowledged them. But I would not give up on my son, even if he had given up on me. The divorce conversation finally came in early 2024. I had been waiting for it, preparing for it. When Sandra sat me down in our living room and said the words, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Jean Sandra began. I do not know how to say this except directly. I want a divorce. I looked at my wife of 32 years. Her face was carefully composed, rehearsed. She had probably practiced this speech with Victor. "Is it because of Victor?" I asked. Sandra flinched slightly, then recovered. "This is not about anyone else. This is about us. We have grown apart." I nodded. What about Tyler? Sandra's expression shifted. She sat up straighter, excited to deliver what she clearly considered good news. "Actually, Victor wants to adopt Tyler. Tyler has agreed. He is going to become Tyler Harrington." I kept my face neutral, but inside my heart was pounding. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. "Tyler is 31 years old," I said. "Why does he need to be adopted?" "It is symbolic," Sandra explained. "Victor wants to make it official. Tyler will take his name. He will truly be part of Victor's family. And Tyler wants this." "Tyler suggested it," Sandra said proudly. "He wants a father figure he can respect." The insult landed as intended, but I absorbed it without reaction. "This would require my signature," I said. "Legal consent from the biological father." Sandra nodded eagerly. "Yes. Will you sign?" I took a breath. "Let me think about it." Sandra's face darkened. "What is there to think about? You have never been much of a father anyway." I flinched at that. It was not true, and she knew it. But I had learned long ago that truth meant nothing to Sandra when it contradicted her narrative. The family meeting happened 2 weeks later at the Whitmore mansion. The room felt like a courtroom. Harold sat at the head of the table, 88 years old, and still radiating arrogance. Sandra and Victor sat together on one side, their hands intertwined. Tyler sat next to them, avoiding my eyes. A lawyer I did not recognize sat at the end, papers spread before him. They had seated me alone on the opposite side. The symbolism was not subtle. "Let us get this done," Harold said impatiently. "We all have places to be." Victor smiled his practiced smile. "Jean, we appreciate you coming. I want you to know that I intend to be a good father to Tyler. Better than—" He caught himself, but the implication hung in the air. "Better than me," I finished. Victor had the decency to look embarrassed. I was going to say different, better suited to guide him in the business world. Tyler finally spoke. "Just sign the papers, Dad. This is what I want." I looked at my son. The boy I had taught to throw a baseball. The boy I had read bedtime stories to every night. The boy who now looked at me like I was an obstacle to be removed. "So you want to become Tyler Harrington," I said slowly. "You want to give up the Whitmore name." "It is just a name," Tyler said dismissively. "Victor's name carries more weight in the business world anyway." Sandra nodded vigorously. "Tyler is right. The Harrington name opens doors. It is practical." I turned to Harold. "And you support this, your grandson giving up your family name?" Harold waved his hand dismissively. "The Whitmore name has served its purpose. What matters now is Tyler's future." I almost laughed. Harold Whitmore, the man who had spent his entire life worshipping his family legacy, was willing to let his only grandson abandon the Whitmore name. Such was his contempt for me that he would sacrifice his own inheritance just to erase my connection to his family. But Harold did not understand what he was doing. None of them did. The lawyer slid the documents across the table. "I need your signature here, Mr. Jean. And here. And initials on these pages." I picked up the pen. Everyone leaned forward, slightly expecting resistance. Drama. Begging. Instead, I signed, clearly and deliberately. Every page. Every line. Sandra exhaled. Finally. I thought you would make this difficult. Victor stood and extended his hand. Thank you, Jean. No hard feelings. I shook his hand briefly. None at all. As I stood to leave, I paused at the door. I hope you have all thought about this carefully. Harold scoffed. What is there to think about? You are the only one who needed to think here, and you made the right choice for once. I smiled. It was not a happy smile. Then I walked out of the Whitmore mansion for the last time. In my car, I called Mr. Bernard. They signed, I said. Tyler is officially changing his name to Harrington. Mr. Bernard was quiet for a moment. The clause has been activated. I will send formal notification to the Whitmore Family Trust Administrator immediately. Do it, I said. I hung up and sat in silence. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red. I thought about Tyler as a baby. Tyler as a little boy laughing in the park. Tyler as a teenager who stopped returning my calls. A single tear rolled down my cheek. I wiped it away and started the car. The notification reached the Whitmore Family Trust Administrator 3 days after the name change was officially recorded. Mr. Bernard had done his work meticulously. The letter cited the exact clause from the original 1935 trust document. It included copies of the legal name change paperwork, certified court documents, proving that Tyler had officially become Tyler Harrington. The administrator, a meticulous 70-year-old attorney named Mr. Franklin, reviewed the documents with growing alarm. He had managed the Whitmore Trust for 40 years, but no one had ever triggered this particular clause. He had assumed it was a relic from another era never to be invoked. But the language was clear. The intentions of Edmund Whitmore were unmistakable. Mr. Franklin picked up his phone and dialed Harold Whitmore's private line. The news reached Harold on a Tuesday morning. He was in his study at the mansion, reviewing quarterly reports from his real estate holdings, when Mr. Franklin arrived unannounced. Harold, Mr. Franklin said gravely, "We have a serious problem." He placed the notification letter on Harold's desk. Harold read it once, then again. Then a third time, his hands beginning to tremble. "This cannot be right," Harold muttered. "There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," Mr. Franklin said. "Your grandson changed his legal name from Whitmore to Harrington. Under the terms established by Edmund Whitmore in 1935, Tyler is no longer eligible to inherit from the family trust." Harold's face went pale. How much the portion designated for the next generation heir? Mr. Franklin paused. "Approximately $15 million. It will be frozen permanently. No one can claim it." Harold gripped the edge of his desk. "And Sandra." Mr. Franklin sighed. "The clause also affects spouses who joined the family through marriage. Sandra only qualified because she had a child carrying the Whitmore name. Without that connection, she loses her eligibility too." Harold finished. "Not entirely. She can still benefit from your direct assets and anything outside the trust. But the trust itself? She no longer has standing." Harold sat in stunned silence. 90 years. His family had built this trust over 90 years, and in one careless moment, his own grandson had thrown away millions. Then the realization hit him. Jean Harold whispered, "That accountant knew." Mr. Franklin tilted his head. "Excuse me." Harold stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. Jean signed those papers without any resistance. He smiled when he left. He said we should think carefully. He knew about this clause. Mr. Franklin frowned. How would he know this information is confidential? But Harold was not listening anymore. He was already grabbing his coat, his car keys, his phone. He had to confront Sandra. He had to find out what Jean had done. The drive to Sandra's house took 20 minutes. Harold ran 3 red lights. His heart pounded so hard he worried it might give out before he arrived. He burst through the front door without knocking. Sandra and Victor were in the living room sipping champagne. They had been celebrating. The divorce was almost finalized. Tyler's adoption was complete. Everything was going according to plan. Until Harold stumbled in white as a ghost, clutching a crumpled letter in his fist. Daddy Sandra rose from the couch. "What is wrong?" "You look terrible." Harold held up the letter with a shaking hand. "The name. Tell me you did not just destroy everything." Sandra's smile faded. "What are you talking about?" Harold collapsed into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 88 years. "The Whitmore Family Trust. There is a clause that says only people with the Whitmore name can inherit." Victor stepped forward. "I do not understand." "What clause?" Harold's voice cracked. "My grandfather wrote it in 1935. Anyone who changes their name forfeits their inheritance. Tyler just gave up $15 million. And because he is no longer a Whitmore heir, Sandra loses her connection to the trust, too." Sandra's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the hardwood floor, but no one moved to clean it up. "That is impossible," Sandra said. "I never heard of any clause." "I forgot about it myself," Harold admitted. It had never mattered before. No one had ever been foolish enough to. He stopped. His eyes widened. Jean, Harold said. Jean knew. What? Sandra shook her head. "Jean is an accountant." How would he know about our family trust? Harold remembered. 19 years ago, a folder left behind, documents about the trust that Jean had returned without comment. He had the papers, Harold said slowly. "Years ago. I left them at his house by accident. He gave them back. I thought he had not looked at them. But he must have. He must have read the whole thing." Sandra sank onto the couch. "That is why he signed so easily. He wanted us to do this." Victor paced the room. "Can we undo it? Tyler can change his name back." Harold shook his head miserably. "The clause is absolute. Once the name is changed, the inheritance rights are permanently forfeited. My grandfather made sure of that. He did not believe in second chances." The room fell silent, except for Harold's labored breathing. "Then Tyler needs to know," Sandra said finally. "We need to tell him what happened." "Yes," Harold agreed. "And then we need to find Jean. They found me at my apartment, a small 2-bedroom rental in a quiet neighborhood far from the Whitmore mansion and everything it represented. I had been expecting them. When I opened the door, I saw Harold first. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a single week. Behind him stood Sandra, her eyes red from crying. Victor hovered nearby, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. And Tyler, my son, stood at the back of the group, looking confused and lost. I stepped aside. "Come in." They filed into my modest living room. Harold looked around with barely concealed disdain even now. Sandra perched on the edge of my second-hand couch, like she was afraid of contamination. Victor remained standing, arms crossed. Tyler sat in a chair in the corner as far from me as possible. "You knew," Harold said without preamble. "You knew about the clause." I settled into my armchair. "Yes." "For how long?" 19 years, I said calmly. "Since 2005. Sandra made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. 19 years. You kept this secret for 19 years. I looked at my soon-to-be ex-wife. You kept secrets too, Sandra. At least mine did not involve another man in our bed." Sandra flinched. Victor shifted uncomfortably. Harold leaned forward. "Why? Why did you do this?" "I did not do anything I said. I signed papers that you asked me to sign. I agreed to something that you wanted. The decision to change Tyler's name was yours. All of yours." "But you knew what would happen," Victor protested. "You could have warned them." I turned to Victor. "Warn them? The man sleeping with my wife. The man trying to take my son. Why would I warn you?" Victor had no answer. Tyler finally spoke. "Dad, why did you not tell me I looked at my son? Really looked at him. Behind the expensive clothes and the arrogant posture, I could still see the little boy who used to fall asleep in my arms." "Would you have listened?" I asked. "When was the last time you listened to anything I said? When was the last time you returned one of my calls? Opened one of my letters?" Tyler's eyes dropped to the floor. I stood and walked to my closet. From the top shelf, I pulled down a cardboard box. Inside were years of accumulated pain. Birthday cards returned unopened. Christmas gifts sent back. Letters marked "Return to Sender" in Tyler's handwriting. I set the box on the coffee table. "This is 20 years of trying to reach you," I said. "Every time I reached out, you pushed me away. Every time I tried to be your father, you told me you did not need one. You said Victor was a real man. You said grandfather was someone to respect. You said I was a failure." Tyler stared at the box. He reached out and picked up one of the letters. His hands trembled as he read his own handwriting on the envelope. "Not wanted. I did not orchestrate this to get revenge." I continued. "I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own choices. You chose to discard the Whitmore name because you thought it did not matter. You chose to embrace Victor because you thought he was better than me. You chose to treat me like garbage for most of your adult life." I sat back down. "All I did was let you make your choice. The consequences were built into that choice 90 years ago, long before any of us were born." Harold's voice was barely a whisper. "You destroyed my family." "No," I said firmly. "Your contempt destroyed your family. Your arrogance. Your belief that you could treat people like dirt without consequences." "I was your son-in-law for 32 years, Harold. I worked hard. I was faithful. I loved your daughter even when she stopped loving me. And how did you treat me like I was less than human? Like I did not deserve to breathe the same air?" I leaned forward. "This is not revenge. This is simply what happens when you build your entire life on looking down at others. Eventually you fall off your pedestal." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Sandra stood. "Come on, Tyler. There is nothing more to say here." But Tyler did not move. "Mom," he said quietly, "I want to talk to Dad. Alone." Sandra hesitated. "Tyler, please." Sandra looked at Harold, then at Victor. Finally, she nodded. We will be outside. One by one, they left. Harold shot me a look of pure hatred as he passed. Victor avoided my eyes entirely. Sandra paused at the door, as if she wanted to say something but then thought better of it. When the door closed, Tyler and I were alone. Tyler stared at the box of returned letters for a long time. I did not know, he finally said. I did not know you had tried so hard. I sent something every year, I said. For your birthday. For Christmas. Sometimes just because. I wanted you to know that I was thinking about you. Tyler picked up another envelope. This one contained a card I had sent for his 25th birthday. He opened it and read my handwritten message inside. Tears began streaming down his face. I thought you did not care, he said. Grandfather always said you were too busy with your ordinary life to bother with us. Mom said you resented us for having money you could never earn. I shook my head. I never resented anyone. I just wanted to be part of your life. Then why did you let this happen? Tyler's voice cracked. Why did you let me give up my inheritance? I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over the city. The same city where I had met Sandra all those years ago. Where I had held Tyler for the first time. Where I had built a life that had slowly crumbled around me. Because some lessons can only be learned the hard way, I said. I could have told you about the clause. I could have warned you. But would you have believed me? Or would you have assumed I was lying to manipulate you? Tyler was quiet. Your grandfather spent 30 years teaching you that I was worthless. I continued. Your mother reinforced it every day. By the time you were an adult, you had decided I had nothing valuable to offer. If I had told you about the clause, you would have dismissed it as a desperate attempt to stay relevant. Tyler wiped his eyes. You are probably right. I turned to face him. I did not want this to happen, Tyler. I prayed that you would come to your senses on your own, that you would see through your grandfather's manipulation, that you would remember all those years when it was just you and me playing catch in the backyard, reading stories at bedtime. I do remember, Tyler said softly. I let them convince me. Those memories did not matter. I crossed the room and sat next to my son. Those memories are the only things that ever mattered to me. Tyler broke down completely. His shoulders shook with sobs as years of suppressed guilt and confusion poured out of him. I put my arm around him and let him cry. I am sorry, Dad, he said between sobs. I am so sorry. I know, I said. I know. We sat like that for a long time. Father and son finally honest with each other for the first time in decades. Eventually, Tyler's tears subsided. He sat up and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. What do I do now? He asked. I have nothing. Victor will probably fire me. Mom is going to blame me for everything. Grandfather might never speak to me again. I squeezed his shoulder. You have yourself. That is more than most people start with. That is not very comforting. I smiled. It is not supposed to be comforting. It is supposed to be true. You are 31 years old, Tyler. You are healthy. You are intelligent when you choose to be. You can build a life on your own terms instead of living according to someone else's expectations. Tyler considered this. A life on my own terms. I do not even know what that means. Then it is time to find out. That night, Tyler stayed late. We talked about everything. His childhood memories, his confusion about my divorce from Sandra, the pressure he felt to live up to Harold's standards, the emptiness he felt despite all his material success. By midnight, something had shifted between us. The wall that had separated us for 20 years had developed cracks. Light was beginning to seep through. Before he left, Tyler hugged me. It was the first real hug we had shared since he was a teenager. "Can I come back?" he asked. "To talk more?" "Any time," I said. "My door is always open." The months that followed brought upheaval to everyone involved. Harold Whitmore's health deteriorated rapidly after the trust debacle. The stress triggered a series of minor strokes that left him weakened and dependent on nurses. His once commanding presence faded to a shadow of itself. He spent his days in the mansion bitter and confused, ranting about betrayal to anyone who would listen. Sandra and Victor's relationship soured almost immediately. Without the promise of Whitmore money, Sandra became less appealing to Victor. Their arguments grew more frequent. Within 3 months, Victor had moved on to a younger woman with her own fortune. Sandra found herself alone in the house they had planned to share, surrounded by expensive furniture and crushing regret. She called me once about 2 months after everything fell apart. "Jean," she said, her voice small and tired. "I made a mistake. I did not disagree." "I thought you would gloat," she said. "Tell me I deserved this." I sighed. "I am not interested in gloating, Sandra. I am not interested in revenge. I just want to live whatever years I have left in peace." She was quiet for a moment. "I did love you once, in the beginning." "I know," I said. "I loved you too." She hung up without saying goodbye. It was the last time we spoke directly. Tyler's transformation was the one bright spot in all the chaos. True to his word, he quit working for Victor. He found a job at a construction company, starting at the bottom, learning the trade from experienced workers who did not know or care about his family background. The work was hard, and the pay was modest, but Tyler threw himself into it with a determination I had never seen from him before. He started visiting me every Sunday. We would grill burgers in my tiny backyard, watch football on my old television, talk about nothing and everything. Sometimes we drove to the lake and fished from the shore just like we used to when he was small. I am learning to build things. Tyler told me one afternoon, holding up calloused hands that had never known manual labor before. Actual things. With my hands. I smiled. Your grandfather would be horrified. Tyler laughed. Probably. But you know what? It feels good. It feels real. I understood exactly what he meant. 6 months after the name change, Tyler had completed a certificate program in construction management. He was promoted to assistant site manager, earning his position through hard work rather than family connections. His co-workers respected him. His supervisors praised his dedication. He also started seeing a therapist working through the complicated feelings about his childhood and his family. It was not easy. There were setbacks and difficult sessions. But Tyler committed to the process. "Dad," he said one evening as we watched the sunset from my porch, "I think I finally understand what you tried to teach me all those years." "What is that?" "That who you are matters more than what you have. That integrity is worth more than inheritance." I patted his shoulder. "It took you a while, but you got there." Tyler grinned. Better late than never, right? I could not argue with that. A year has passed since I signed those papers in the Whitmore mansion. I still live in my small apartment. I still work as an accountant, though I am thinking about retiring soon. My needs are simple. My pleasures are modest. I have never been interested in wealth for its own sake. But I am richer now than I have ever been. Every Sunday, Tyler comes over. Sometimes he brings groceries and cooks dinner. Sometimes we just sit and talk. The conversations flow easily now, unburdened by the weight of old resentments. He has started dating a woman he met at work. A carpenter's daughter, he told me with a wink. Thought you might appreciate the irony. I did. Harold passed away 3 months ago. His funeral was a grand affair, attended by hundreds of business associates and society figures. I did not go. Neither did Tyler. We held our own small memorial by the lake, just the two of us. We talked about the complicated man Harold had been, his strengths and his fatal flaws, the legacy he had tried so hard to control, and the ways it had ultimately slipped through his fingers. He loved us in his own way, Tyler said. He just did not know how to show it without making it about power. Maybe I said. Or maybe he never learned that love and control are not the same thing. Tyler nodded. I am glad you taught me the difference. Sandra reached out after the funeral, asking if we could talk. I politely declined. There is nothing left to say between us. I wish her no ill will, but our chapter is closed. Sometimes I think about the clause that changed everything. 90 years ago, Edmund Whitmore wrote those words determined to preserve his family name and fortune for generations to come. He could never have imagined that his own descendants would trigger the clause through their arrogance and cruelty. Or maybe he could. Maybe that was the point all along. A test built into the family legacy waiting to expose those who valued the name without understanding what it should represent. I will never know for certain. But I like to think that Edmund, wherever he is, would understand what I did and why. Last week, Tyler asked me an interesting question. Dad, he said, do you regret waiting so long? 19 years is a long time to carry a secret. I thought about it carefully before answering. I regret that it was necessary, I said. I regret that things between us got so broken that extreme measures were the only way to create change. But do I regret being patient? No. Patience is not the same as passivity. I was waiting for the right moment, the moment when my actions would matter. Tyler nodded slowly. You could have exposed the clause at any time. You could have used it as leverage to get better treatment. I could have. I agreed. But that would have been about manipulation, about power. I did not want to become the thing I was fighting against. So you waited until we made our own choice. Exactly. I gave you every opportunity to treat me with basic human dignity. When you chose differently, you also chose the consequences. I simply removed myself as the obstacle between your actions and their results. Tyler was quiet for a moment. That is either incredibly wise or incredibly cold. I have not decided which. I laughed. Maybe it is both. As I sit here now, watching another sunset paint the sky, I think about what I have learned from this long journey. I learned that patience is not weakness. It is strength that most people do not have the discipline to cultivate. I learned that you cannot force people to respect you, but you can position yourself so that disrespecting you comes with natural consequences. I learned that revenge is a meal best not served at all. What I did was not revenge. It was simply stepping out of the way and letting gravity do its work. Most importantly, I learned that the relationships we save are worth more than the battles we win. I could have destroyed my connection with Tyler forever, Instead, I used the crisis as an opportunity for rebuilding. The $15 million Tyler lost means nothing compared to the father-son bond we have recovered. They called me a failure for 23 years. They took my wife, my home, and tried to take my son. But in the end, I got back the only thing that mattered. Sometimes the greatest victory is not winning the battle. It is letting your enemies defeat themselves. And maybe, just maybe, that 90-year-old clause was not just about names. It was about who we truly are when everything else is stripped away. I look at the photo of Tyler on my shelf, the recent one from last Christmas. He is smiling, really smiling, standing next to me in front of a modest tree decorated with ornaments we picked out together. That is my inheritance. That smile, that connection, that hard-won reconciliation between a father and son who almost lost each other forever. Edmund Whitmore can keep his millions. I have something better. I have my son back, and that my friends is worth more than any clause or fortune could ever provide. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to wait years for the right moment to reveal an important truth? Have you ever dealt with family members who looked down on you until circumstances forced them to see your value? Share your story in the comments below. I would love to hear how you handled it. If this story touched you or made you think about patience and family, please hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. I share stories about real-life situations and the wisdom we can gain from them. Please share this video with someone who might need to hear this message today. Sometimes patience is the most powerful weapon we have. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. May you find the strength to wait for your moment and the wisdom to use it well. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly matter.